They like you. They really like you.
That was excellent. Thank you. That made my day.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, thank you, thank
Sure.
you. I just, coming up with questions that I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
It reminds me
That
of
you could do in public.
Yes.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the old Gertrude Stein, Alice B. Toklas story, where Gertrude Stein was dying and in bed, and Alice B. Toklas, her partner, leaned over and said, Gertrude, Gertrude, what is the answer? And Gertrude looked up at Alice and said, Alice, what is the question?
And died, right?
You, on the other hand, will not.
No.
But, coming up with these questions. So I'm going to start with this one. Ready? What would you like?
Wait, now, before you do that, are these like, do these guys ask you, or they're going to ask questions later?
They're going to ask questions later, absolutely. And the other thing is, as I told David as we were walking up the stairs, these are writers, directors, and playwrights. Collaboration. This is what we're known for. This is what's so hot in this school. And you are a true collaborator, and you are an actor and now director. You are a singer. You are a dancer. Are you a writer?
Letters.
And you
Elaborate emails.
He's a pianist. He was
Yes.
going to be a concert. He was going to be a concert pianist.
Yes.
What changed?
I wasn't any good.
Okay.
Apparently, you have to be to make a living as a concert pianist.
And that changed at Yale?
Yeah. I still play. When I went to college, I thought I was going to. I acted for fun, but I thought I was going to be a musician professionally. And when I was at Yale undergrad, and the level of talent was such that I realized that I wasn't meant to be, and then acting took over. It went more from a pastime to a real profession. So, but I still play. I play every day.
You play every day.
Every day.
I wanted to say that when I visited you, I think when you were doing curtains backstage, you had a piano backstage.
Yeah.
He had a piano backstage in
Yeah.
his dressing room, and I think I asked you, what are you doing with
That's
the piano
right.
backstage? And you said?
They just couldn't get it out of there, so I was stuck with it. No, I practice every day. Yeah.
In between?
Yeah, in
Shows.
between matinee and evening shows.
Isn't that-
It actually, honestly, the real reason the piano was there is I had done Spamalot before that, and
Yeah.
in Spamalot I actually played the piano in the show on stage. So I'd asked for a piano in my dressing room and a little electric keyboard so I could practice, because I don't usually play in public. I usually play only for my own. And then when they negotiated the contract for curtains, no one paid attention, and they said, and I got to the theater and there was a piano in the dressing room. I thought, well, okay. Yeah. So that's the honest answer about that.
You have a musical ear.
Yeah, I do.
Do you think, well, let me get back to my,
Okay.
what would you like to tell the students that you wished someone had told you when you were a student?
Run!
Run where?
It's tricky. It's a lot like the end of The Wizard of Oz when she says, oh, if you always could have clicked your shoes and gone home. And she says, well, when the fuck didn't you tell me that? And she said, well, if I told you, you wouldn't have believed me. It's like that. It's like there's actually, that is what I would tell you, is that so much, I'm really speaking now from an actor's standpoint, but I'm sure it's true for any discipline. So much of what I feel I'm able to do now, so much of the pleasure I get and the skill that I have came out of the years it took me to get here. That it wasn't like, oh, if someone had only told me this, then I would have known. I came to New York right out of college. I probably shouldn't have. I got into some drama schools. I was going to go to drama school, and an actor friend said, I want you to see if you want to do this before you spend any more time and money on school. And so I went to New York, and I got lucky. I got jobs right away, but there were plays that I was performing in professionally and that I was not remotely equipped to be on stage, in the arena of New York, and the critics reminded me of that. But so I lived, and anyway, if someone had told me, ooh, make sure you're ready before you go to New York, then maybe I wouldn't have come, and maybe who knows what would have happened. So I got nothing for you.
You sold ties at Bloomingdale's?
Yes, yeah, don't do that. Yeah, I did sell ties. Well, when I came to New York, I came right out of college, and the first job I had, I was sort of working through a temp agency. I don't know if they
God.
have those anymore,
Oh,
but
yeah,
yes. Oh yeah, okay, good. It's always, I have to say, it's always scary when you speak to younger people because it's like, and then we turned on the record player. And
You know, don't do this gesture.
yeah, I know. So I was working through a temp agency, but I got a job as Christmas help at Bloomingdale's selling neckties. And I was absolutely terrible. I'm a terrible salesperson. I've never been a waiter or anything like that, only because I would be a shitty waiter.
You were a waiter on stage in the Durang play.
That was my first professional job. I played a waiter, and that's why I always tip really well, because I'm always so impressed with the people who can
Beyond
do that.
Therapy, played a waiter. Was that your first off-Broadway?
That was my first job. That was my first. That was also a great introduction to this business because, on the one hand, I came to New York, let's say in the fall of '81, and in the spring of '82, I auditioned for Beyond Therapy and got it.
Wow.
And I just was looking up the date. It was 30 years ago. We opened in May, so I had my first professional job, and my equity card, and I was in a Broadway show within however many months that was, and it got crucified with the New York Times and closed in 2 weeks.
Oh.
So I had the entire experience that you can have right away, and I think that's that's another along the lines of what would you tell students.
Yeah.
That was pretty great because I was working with terrific people. John Lithgow and Diane Wiest were the two stars of the show, and of course Chris Durang. And at the same time, I got to experience what it's like to be in something that you love, to go through a preview period where the audiences laughed their butts off, have a review come out, and the next day have the audience sit completely stone silent at this terrible play. That's tough, but it's what it is. And I think the great thing for me was I found out, I still want to do this, even though that was really painful. I can tell you that this is literally the true opening night. So opening night, my first professional job on Broadway, my mom and dad come into town from upstate.
Saratoga Springs.
Saratoga Springs in upstate New York. And they had been, my dad had always wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
And he ended up acting for various reasons. He didn't go into the profession, but he acted in community theater at home. I never got to see him do it. He stopped doing it before I came along. But I found out that he was apparently amazing. And like with touring companies of professional actors, like we have a newspaper article with a quote from Diana Barrymore, one of the Barrymore families, who like came through with her show and they recruit local actors, and she said, George was my dad's name. She said, if George Pierce is an amateur actor, then what the hell are we doing with professional actors?
Wow.
Like, that kind of thing. So he was really good, but I never got to see him act. And really they were concerned when I wanted to be an actor. They were very concerned that I wanted to be a musician. And halfway through Yale, I called them up and I said, I have good news and bad news. And, but when they came to opening night on Broadway, and they felt what that was like, and I'm sure my dad was having his dreams, fulfilled in front of him, and there's sitting, celebrities in the audience, all of that. They thought, oh, okay, well, this we understand. This we get, if this is what it's like. And we went to Sardi's restaurant. Sardi's at that time was still the place to go, the theater hangout. And the opening night party was a block away at the Marriott Marquis Hotel. So we went across the street, had dinner, and about 11 o'clock, back then this is what happened, the TV news came on with the reviews, and the New York Times and the other papers came out. So 11 o'clock, the New York Times comes out, they bring it to the restaurant, and we read it, and it's not good. Very bad review. And so after a few minutes, I said, I should probably go check in on the opening night party, see how everyone's doing. So I go from Sardi's, the one block, to the opening night party to the Marriott Marquis, and I walk in, and it is empty. It was the entire lobby of the Marriott Marquis. All of the guests had left. All of the food had been cleared away. Chris Durang and one friend were left in the middle of this big empty room. That's how quickly it happened. So, yeah. Yeah, I know, that's the business.
That's the critics.
Yeah,
And the business.
less so now, because because the internet critics have a little bit less power. But what hasn't changed is the economics.
No.
Now, in fact, I don't know how much you guys are paying attention to what's going on, but like Rebecca, this big musical that was just coming in, also Funny Girl, this huge musical that was just coming in. A week, 2 weeks before they were scheduled to start rehearsal, meaning everything is in place, and the money people
pulled out
because they got scared. That's kind of the way it happens now. It happens a little earlier, but it's the same shock effect for the entire company who had, I got so many friends who this is their big break, or finally they got this great gig, and it's going to last a year, and it's going to be this and that, and gone.
I don't ever remember that happening when I started out, that sudden, it's over.
Well, it depends. It also depends on, the difference between Broadway and off-Broadway and off-off, and some places in New York, the Lort theaters in New York have more security.
Yeah.
Because they have subscription audiences.
Right,
so you can even, I was just in a play, an off-Broadway play at the Manhattan Theater Club it was actually not a bad play, but it got astoundingly evil reviews across the board. They just hated it, this play. But we had a subscription audience, so we were able to run.
The Manhattan Theater Club.
Yeah. And God bless them, the Manhattan Theater Club audience tends to be very, very old. But they're people who really love the theater. And these people came, and we didn't have the silence. In fact, the first performance we had after the reviews, they loved it.
Yeah.
They were there, so they're used to going to the theater. They're used to seeing new plays. They're used to seeing stuff that maybe is a little experimental or trying something different or doesn't always work. And they're able to see what does work or see what we were going for.
Right. I'm remembering that scene that with the monologue that you had in Close Up Space.
Mm-hmm. Close Up Space, it's called.
The play that he just did, the Manhattan Theater Club. So you had to start off with, there he was, and you were facing the fourth wall, as Uta would say, the fourth side, the fourth wall, and you were reading, you were correcting professors. Yeah,
it was an old-fashioned overhead projector, and I was an editor at a small literary house, and ostensibly I was giving an orientation to a new intern about how we do things here and how we edit it. In fact, what I was editing was letters from the private school where I had exiled my daughter, where they had said, she's completely out of control, she's burning things down and naked, and we're expelling her and sending her home. And the first scene is me reading this, and then going through it grammatically and saying where all the punctuation was and redlining it and saying all that stuff. It's a really brilliant first scene because you get the whole package.
Right.
You see how this man deals with these issues. You can imagine why the daughter's going crazy.
Yes, that's exactly it. And so I was thinking, can you share with us, do you bang, boom, you're on, the lights are up and you're starting in, what kind of preparation you would do, or before that? Because you're the first one on.
That's a really good question, because one of the things how many of you are actors?
Cool. Yeah.
One of the things that happens in a long run, and this is the great Uta Hagen said, she's better on the last performance of a show, and she means a year and a half, 2 years into a run, than she is on the first performance. I feel exactly the same way. And part of what will happen to you when you're lucky enough to have a long run, if you approach it right, if your director approaches the material right, you will continue to change and grow, not in obvious ways, not like one day you decide to pick up a chair and throw it at the other actor. That's the way they do it in Chicago, but that's not... and in fact, Uta was very against that. She didn't like that stuff. She required the security and the accuracy of things being more or less the same. But over the course of time, your understanding of what happens deepens, and new insights happen. It is the same, I would imagine, if you're a writer and you go over and over what you've written, and you obviously rewriting, but even not just rewriting, just rereading, and suddenly you think, oh, I know why he's going to do this. That's what happens with me. And when you asked about what was your preparation before going on, my preparation for a good half of the run was making sure I remembered the lines. And it wasn't till about, I would say 2 weeks ago or more that I thought, now what am I thinking about before I go out and do this? Because it was also, but part of this is necessary. There was, in this particular piece, the challenge was you're speaking, you're the audience, the projector's here, screen behind you in my office in the place. And the conceit is that at first, as an audience, you think I'm talking to you. So physically, as an actor, you're either dealing with the editing or you're looking out at the audience.
Did you actually see audience members, by the way, or not?
A little bit. You can hear them rustling and phones.
And that affected you?
No, you know what? It would affect me, except I've been at this for so long. There's almost no noise body function event in the audience that I haven't been through, including in curtains, a family in the front row passing a full chicken dinner buckets back and forth to each other. And we were hungry too. It was a matinee. It was rough. So the setup of this, and then what happens, so here, and it's lit in such a way that you can't actually really see or don't notice that there is in fact another person on stage. There's an intern, a young girl, sitting on the sofa, and I get to the end of this long harangue, and then suddenly I say, "What?" And the lights come up, and she's got her hand up, and she's talking to me. So part of where my focus was as an actor for a long time was simply on the reality of, okay, how do you talk to this person in a way that is public enough for just literally for the practical means of reaching this live audience, but also so that this audience looking at me, if they saw the play twice, the first time they would see and believe that I'm talking to all of you, and the second time they would believe, oh, I see, he's really talking to this person. So it was all about thinking, all right, what would you do? How do you, where do your eyes go? What am I looking at? Which would be probably looking out a window, or as how you look at things as you look at the exit sign while you're thinking and talking about something. So even if I'm talking to Karen now, and I want you to understand this, Karen, very clearly, and I think, how do I put this to you so you understand? You see what I mean? So it's that kind of thing. That's where my focus was for a long time. And it wasn't until I was really comfortable with that that I could then start to let the other influences of my daughter and my feelings about my daughter and the feeling about her getting expelled and this asshole who couldn't handle her. I have a wonderful line where I say, you know, no, I'm not going to take her. I pay you $60,000 a year to not send her home. So.
Did you have as we say, there's so many words, substitution, personalization, you knew who you were talking to, what school you were talking about, and what professor?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
I do that, by the way. I do.
Yeah.
I did it before I worked with Uta. I did this two-person play with Uta Hagen.
Oh, God.
And which was amazing and one of the great experiences of my life. And of course, I had read the book in college and studied it in acting class. And in preparation for working with her, I reread the damn book because I thought.
Challenge.
In fact, can I tell you?
Yes,
well,
please.
both of them. Respect for Acting,
Yes.
which is the one I would have read back in ancient history,
Right.
and then Challenge for the Actor, which was her rewrite. Right. But at one point, the great thing about Uta was she was deeply devoted to her art, but she was also a very practical woman of the theater. She came from a very traditional theater background, and we were in rehearsals. It's like the end of the first week of rehearsal, and I was doing something.
Weren't you picking up the phone? And
No, that's a different story.
Oh, okay.
I'm not there yet.
Okay.
I don't know if I did. This was just simply, I said a line, and she turned to the director and said, well, if he says that way, I won't get my laugh. And I thought, you can't say that, you're Uta Hagen. I read in the book where it says if the other actor doesn't do what you want them to do, then you must try to get them to do what you want through the playing of the scene. I thought, and what do you mean, get my laugh? I didn't think you were thinking about that shit. But she was all of those things, which is a really good lesson for all of us, which is it is both about the esoterics and the internal reality and the bare bones of you got to be seen, you got to be heard, and the play has to be understood.
And you got to know what might get your laughs.
That's right.
Or where they are. Do you think that can be taught?
Where the laughs are?
Yeah. Do you think you can teach comedy? Do you think you can teach someone to be funny?
I don't know.
Right.
I mean, that's a good question. I think in some cases you can stop people from being not funny. I think that's true. I mean, my big thing, my style of acting, but also what I am drawn to in acting, in performing, is people who allow you in as opposed to showing you. Right. And anybody seen The Artist? This new movie? Okay. I haven't seen it. I got a screener of it because of the Screen Actors Guild. I watched the first 15 minutes. I think I probably have to go to a movie theater and see it. I'm sure it's great. Yeah. But I got so sick of things being done to me, which is the style of silent movies,
Right.
that nothing let me in until Malcolm McDowell.
Sitting there.
Malcolm McDowell, who's the guy with the white hair, if you don't know, sitting there. The girl who
The
he
extra.
kisses comes and shows up, and she just sits next to him for a
That's
few
right.
minutes. And suddenly I was like,
Boink.
what's happening? Who is
Yeah.
that? What's going on? And it was just like the camera went into him
Right.
instead of bouncing off him. That is my aesthetic, as I said. It's also my aesthetic for comedy. And so like when I just directed a musical. And musicals are notorious for being thrown at you because it's a musical. I don't like it, and I don't believe musicals need to be that way. And I believe you can accomplish what a musical needs to do and still have the activity be here as opposed to here,
Right.
and let the audience come to you. So I find frequently things are funnier when they aren't laid out to you, but rather you feel like you discovered the joke rather than someone telling you about it.
You worked with Peter Brook. Did you tour in Russia with the Cherry Orchard?
Yeah.
So here you were touring in Russia with the Cherry Orchard,
Yeah.
a Russian play
Yeah.
in Russia.
Yes.
How was that?
Foolish. That was amazing. Have you all read The Empty Space? Yes. He's really great. I can tell you an exercise that we did. You know, Chekhov is so hard.
Yeah.
And
Why is it so hard?
it's hard because it's everything. And you talk about a collaboration. I mean, that is a collaboration between let me tell you two stories, if I may, that illustrate how the challenge and how Peter addressed this. The first thing was when we had our first rehearsal, first read-through of The Cherry Orchard. We had tables, we were out at BAM, tables set around with a gigantic Russian banquet with caviar and vodka and everything else. And I don't know what happened after that. No, but the first thing we did not read the play. After we had eaten and drunk, the first thing we did was we took a few Chekhov short stories. And we sat around the table, and Peter's method is he just says, all right, someone start. So already you're developing these sort of nerve endings of no one told who to start.
Right.
Someone starts, and then when it's time, the next person take over. So already you can feel it's like, oh, we kind of got to be sensing what we're supposed to do. And we would take turns just going around the table reading the short stories. And it was fantastic, you know, Chekhov short stories. Did it a few times. And then we read the play. And the play was like ashes in our mouth. It was absolutely dead on arrival. Because in the short stories, everything is there. And so we had, in one afternoon, we saw what our job was. Because we saw the difference between Chekhov, where everything is there, and Chekhov with just the lines. And we realized how far we had to go to fill it. So that was I can still feel it now, that sort of
Wow.
feeling of emptiness of like, oh wow, we got a
Right.
big balloon to inflate.
Right.
So the other thing, this is just a great insight of Peter's. Peter spent a lot of time in Russia, and it wasn't random that we went to Russia. He's a big hero there. He had done a famous production of Hamlet that toured Russia in the 60s, and they worship him, and they know all about him. This was, by the way, back in 1989. So it was just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, so a very different Russia. But so the other exercise we did was we were in a circle, standing in a circle, and he said, okay, two people come into the middle of the circle and greet each other as if you have never met before. So two people did that. Right. Now two people come in, and one of you is, you went to school together, but you haven't seen each other in a couple of years. We did that. And then now two people come in and you were lovers and now you're best friends, but you know, and it kept escalating until finally two people who were lovers, you were torn apart during the war, you haven't seen each other for 20 years, and you see each other on a street. How do you greet each other? And of course, you know,
Oh my God.
huge running passion, like that. And he said, that's how Russians say hello. And there you have an insight into what Chekhov requires.
Wow.
Because what you see usually when you do in scene study or you see a production of Chekhov, it's usually dull as dishwater,
Yeah.
because people are being very real. And it's Chekhov. It's your name day, Irina. I've always wanted to do a production of that. I may direct this, where she, it's not my, who is it? Where she says, it's your name day, Irina.
Olga.
Olga. And Irina says, it's your name day, Irina. And every line she gets, but I don't know where that would go, so I'm not going to. What am I? Oh, so either these productions or the scene, either they're flat because people are trying to be real, or they are beyond broad because people said, remember, it's called a comedy,
right.
And so things are either melodramatic or they're wacky or they're high concept. I was actually in a production of The Seagull directed by a Romanian, which began with the fourth act.
What do you mean?
It actually, the halfway through it's a long story, I won't go into it, but it was a conceptual thing. This was a time of very auteur directors doing that. But what Peter had suggested was that no, the innate passion, the innate bigness of how Russians relate to each other, that's how you fill the play. And then it will simultaneously live and have theatricality, but be real.
And how did you work on that to fill that?
We just sort of absorbed that lesson.
Yes,
The other thing he did, there's a famous Russian movie called Unfinished Piece for Player Piano, which I think it's Ivanov is what it's based on.
Oh, okay.
And he showed that to us, and it really is the example of how to play Chekhov. It's pretty much flawless, and it's available on something.
I mean, that's always the actor's dilemma, is how to fill it, but real, for real, not with...
It's like sex.
Okay. I don't know what you're talking about. Now, did you ever improvise as an actor or as a director, David? Okay, you've had a reaction.
I hate it so much. We did, but with Peter, we improvised all the time. And also we just did La Bête. Anybody see La Bête? The great, Well, a lot of, actually, I have to say, fantastic improvisation in that process that Matthew Warchus had us do. Because a lot of it was about, there was this whole acting troupe, an ensemble, who appeared in not a huge chunk of the play, but who they were, what all of our relationships were, was very important. And so we had a lot of stuff of just getting in tune with each other. And also Mark Rylance is very much, his roots are deep into that improvisational. We did mask work. We had these wild, great British guys who were experts in mask. And I have to say that caused me to love improvisation and mask work in a way that I never had before.
Because
they were so, it wasn't flaky and sort of I'm looking for, pretentious and, you're supposed to learn. You really did learn stuff. People really did transform, and there was also a huge mystical component to them. Mark is a very, if you saw Jerusalem, that part was written for him. And the sort of mythological roots of that part are the mythological roots of Mark. And so the kind of shamanic, whatever you say that, aspect of the mask work, of all that, we all took very seriously. And it was transformational and created a great bond between all of us. And I got to say, approaching the play that way, we all went on, it was a great variety of actors in the show, but we all went on that journey together, and it didn't seem hokey. And we really, I think it is partially responsible for whatever magic was in that production.
You know, while we're on La Bête, Amy, ask your question.
Well, I saw one of the
Louder, and I might have to repeat it if you don't do it loud.
And I sat in the front row, and one of the previews, and that 40-minute monologue at the beginning that
Yes.
he was doing, and I kept looking at you and going, oh my gosh, he's still listening, he's still listening.
He's still listening.
That's so funny because I was doing the same thing to you.
How did you do that?
That was, I'll tell you how I did it. I'll tell you, this was my strategy. When they wanted me to do the play, Mark was already doing the play, and they said, look, any part you want, look at the play. And I looked at the play, and I don't know, Joanna Lumley played the princess, but in the actual original script, that part is a prince. It's a guy.
Oh, I didn't know.
And that would have been probably what they were thinking when they offered me the play, because the prince is sort of a foppish kind of dilettante kind of, and possibly people could see me doing that. But reading the play, though, the part that kept speaking to me was this other part, because he's a guy with really two things about it. One, he has very strong convictions and beliefs about art and the power of art and what it should be and what it shouldn't be. That's one thing. And the other was, I was fascinated by this challenge of, he has this whole long 40-minute silent monologue while Mark is doing his 40 minutes, you know, this guy has this other. So that intrigued me. And what I knew was, all that mattered was who was playing Valère, Mark's part. Because if that were, as some stars are, someone who was, it was all about them, it was all about, you know, the rest of you fend for your, find what light you can, you know, this, I wasn't interested. And so I went to London, this was the year before, and we just did a read-through of the play with me and Mark, and then they just assembled a group of actors. And we connected instantly. And the other thing that happened was he had just opened in this brand new play called Jerusalem at the Royal Court, and I thought, oh, well, I'm here, I should go see it. And I went and saw it and said, yeah, well, of course I'm going to be on stage with him. I don't care if I never have a word. I want this experience. And so it was about that. It wasn't hard to listen to him. And it was also about finding, through a long rehearsal process, God, the hardest part is the very beginning, always. But to be there with nothing to say and not yet know what the shape of the whole thing is for you, that's hard. It was exhausting. Oh my God, your brain is just fried. But what ultimately happens is you start to chart in the same way that Mark had to chart a general shape so that it wasn't just talking for 40 minutes, which people couldn't have put up with. He found the peaks and valleys. So for me, and also Stephen Ouimet, the wonderful actor who also was silently listening, we had to chart. You know, you can't get sick of listening 5 minutes in. You can't make that choice. If you're planning to leave the room, you can only do it once. You can only try to leave the room once. You can't do. So scoping out that, figuring out what keeps me, and also, frankly, doing the same work you would do in a more normal play, which is, we've all been with people, I'm doing it now, who talk too much.
No.
And
But
it's amazing, what goes through your mind, including things like, I want to die. I could jump out the window right now, and she would never know because she's still talking. And I have a dear friend who can talk a lot, and you can sometimes, just for fun, you make tests of like behavior that would cause another person to stop talking, and it's like, you know, including leaving the room and stuff like that. So it's all of those million things, and then by the time we get to actual performance, we've honed and shaped and figured out how that can be, and then you have the blessing of 3 actors on stage who are willing to go with anything that happens.
There you go.
So
and then you have 8 performances of that, every time having to listen, every time wanting to listen, every time having refreshing.
And you know what it is when you're, any of you who are actors, when you're on stage with someone and you're looking in their eyes, the same words come out of your mouth, but the look is different in your eyes every time, and it can lead you anywhere.
If you can see it, if you take it in.
We had one where Mark, he was supposed to be this grotesque pig, and so he came in, literally, this is what he would do, which, by the way, is not in the play at all. This was his interpretation of the role, and then they rewrote the role to accommodate this. He would come in, he had sliced pieces of melon, and like a squirrel, stored them in his cheeks.
Oh my God.
So that they would come spewing out, he didn't know when.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I mean, some people in the audience and on stage sometimes could not believe how late in the scene a piece would suddenly come winging out.
God.
And the other thing he would do is he would down a bottle of, I don't know, Perrier or something. He's English, so probably not Perrier. But right before he came on, so that the belches would come unexpectedly. And one night, we found out afterwards why it happened. So Stephen and I are downstage. Mark is upstage near the bookcase. And he had a burp with content. And we were, obviously none of us could look at each other. Especially because the thing about it was the look of surprise on his face when it happened was unbelievable. But what had happened was he had a burp coming, but he didn't want to let it out because it would have tread on a laugh he was going to get on. So he held on to it, and by consequence of holding on to it, it had more.
The tricks of the trade. Watermelon is all I can think of now.
Did you get hit at all? Because people in the front row, we literally, sometimes I'd look down, people would have their playbills like this. They'd be,
Now, the difference of preparation that you do for film, camera, TV, and the difference as an actor in the theater. Is there any difference? Let me just cut to the chase. What was it like, David Hyde Pierce, when you did your first television show, walking on the set?
It's a two-part answer because there's the main two basic kinds of television. One is single camera, where it's shot more like a movie. And what they do less of now, but occasionally still do, is multi-camera, like 4 cameras, which is what we did on Frasier. I had also, my first show was actually a short run of a show called The Powers That Be,
right.
Also 4 cameras. That is less like a movie. That's more like doing a play because you have a live audience.
Yeah.
And although you do have to get used to the cameras that are there and used to sort of hitting marks and stuff, it's basically you're playing for the live audience, which ends up being exactly the right scale of performance for a television audience. Because if you, a TV show is not a movie, your face isn't the size of that wall, right. So you have to like really internalize everything. It's a performance. And so it wasn't that different. The main thing I had to adjust to as a theater actor going into television was the ability to make mistakes. Because we're all trained to get it right, because you're out there in front of an audience. But when you're getting rewrites every day, sometimes right before you go on, and I mean major rewrites, are like, I don't know whether it's somewhere in the first season of Frasier, I got an entirely new second act, including a 3-page monologue in the dinner break before we shot the show.
Oh boy.
And this is where I learned the lesson, because what I did was I learned the speech, and I got it absolutely word perfect, but I didn't play the scene. Because what was I doing? I was busy remembering the lines. And Kelsey, his technique, not on stage, but in television, which he developed over years of doing Cheers and everything, is that he really learns it at the last minute, because he believes what the camera picks up is the spontaneity of thought. That's the most important thing. And so I learned from him that you have to be willing to screw up. That's why there's cameras. That's why it's not like a failure on your part, which in the theater it would be. It's like that's your responsibility. Here your responsibility is to deliver the moment. And if you can do it and get it right, that's even better. But you have to know that safety net is there so you can be free when you've just been given all this.
What kind of directors do you love to work for, and why? I mean, in other words, what do you look for?
Well, I've had I have to say I'm a very, I embrace all styles of directing, except of course bad directing. And bad directing comes in very different forms because people like Dan Sullivan, also Matthew Warchus, surprisingly, who directed La Bette, he directed Boeing and the Norman Conquest. I don't know how much you've seen of his stuff, but he's amazing. Same thing with Dan Sullivan. If you look at their productions, they are so beautifully directed. If you act in their productions, you feel like you haven't been directed.
Oh.
They have a real, genuine gift to say very little. And the two things that does, for those of you who are directing, it allows ownership from the people who are creating the thing. It allows them to develop, and you may see ideas that you didn't have that might be even more interesting. But it also allows for, as the show goes on, it will continue to be a living, breathing thing because you have killed the instinct. Usually you start a scene, you're in rehearsal, and you do it, you finish the scene, and you're like, how was that? Well, after the 5th time of getting, You stop looking. You think, well, I guess I'm not getting anything there. And then you go, and they know what they want. They know what they're doing. And as things go on, sometimes they'll say, you know, of the two ways of doing that, I think I like this one better, that much. Or they'll just say one thing. Here, I'll give you, this is okay, two of the greatest directions I've ever gotten. First one, first day on Frasier, my very first scene in the coffee shop with Frasier at the bar, and we go to sit down to have coffee. And as I get to the chair, Jimmy Burrows, great television director, says to me, hey, why don't you take out your handkerchief and wipe off the chair before you sit down?
See that? Physical action.
Cut to early rehearsals of La Bête, my very first entrance in La Bête. And the premise of La Bête, I told you about the melon spitting and all that. Well, the premise of that opening is that my friend and I have just sat through this boor commandeering our table at this party that the princess has insisted we meet this guy, and he has been going on, and I thought, oh my God. So I came in, and several times I've come in a state, and I take out a handkerchief and wipe off my face, because thinking, you know, if this guy's been spewing food all over me. And about the second or third time, Matthew took me aside and said, you can't do that. And I said, why? He said, because all of these people know you from a different place, and they are just waiting to peg you as that person. And you can't, if you give them an inch, they'll have figured it out. They'll say, oh great, that's him, that's the guy we were expecting to see. So, which is such an insightful thing for a director to say. And in fact, it ended up, that character was a very different in every way for me. But I wouldn't have known that something as simple like that. And two handkerchief directions.
It reminds me of a friend of mine, Judy Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
She worked on Oz. It was her first directing. Remember Oz?
The TV show?
Yes, the TV show, the TV series. And she said to Rita Moreno, they did the scene, and it was a very emotional scene. And at the end of the scene, she said to Rita Moreno, she gave her a handkerchief, and she said, you might want to use this. And oh, okay. And then and they did it again, and Rita cried.
Oh.
But just to say, you might want to use this. That's all she said. Just reminded me.
Cool.
Now you're directing. You're going to be you are directing. You have directed.
Yep.
So what do you look for when your first day of rehearsal? Is this a right question? What do you look for? No.
Here's what I don't know if I ever said this to them, but
what's the hardest? We talked about what's the challenge? Sorry to interrupt you. As a director, what's the hardest thing for you?
I'll tell you. Yes. Okay. It's not what I thought it would be.
Which is?
I've been an actor for 152 years. And so I thought, okay, tech is going to be scary. Handling the designers is going to be scary. You know, it was a musical. The stage movement and people coming and going and all that stuff. Working with actors I can do. Everything else was a breeze. And working with the actors was a breeze too. But there was a point with one actor where it was a younger, less experienced person, and I couldn't get what I wanted, and I reached a point where the more I said, the more just kind of frustrated they got. And I didn't know what to do. And I thought, I thought that was the thing I would be good at. And I wasn't bad at it in other cases, but this was just one of those things, and I had to learn to just back off and let it be. And also, sometimes you realize people may not be able to get to what you were hoping for, or you have to do something different. You have to be sensitive. So that was a surprise to me.
Yeah. I interrupted you on something else. What aspect?
The first thing I said to them was, I will make a deal with you. If you don't act, I won't direct.
Wow.
That was.
Do you have any thoughts about auditioning, David? You don't have to audition anymore, but do you remember can you say anything to the students about, because they're auditioning now and they will have to be auditioning in the real world when they graduate? And,
I can say one thing. In my early days, before I ever went out to do television, I did an audition for a television show, and the casting director stopped me, and she said, because I've been doing theater. She stopped me and she said, "Are you doing TV acting?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Don't do that." She said, just do the scene." And I thought,
Oh,
"Oh,
why?
okay."
What were you doing?
I must have been, I was probably heightening it or doing a little of that kind of, well, this is, basically it involved a deep subconscious looking down on television and thinking, well, this is the kind of shitty acting we do on television, so that's what I'll do.
That's changed.
So I think it's all about, in all those situations, oh, it's so hard. I mean,
Yeah. Auditioning.
it just sucks. And
Do you remember a horrible audition you did?
oh, let's see.
Like the worst?
Not in any particular detail.
Oh, that's
It's just you gotta. I don't know what to say. It's I don't know what to say because it's all about getting to the place where you can be yourself, getting to the place where you can not only trust yourself but say to be able to. Oh, this is what I would say: read the script a million times, and that is not just about auditioning. That is when I distill it all down. I realize when people say work on a script, all I do is read it over and over and over again. And you actually have to read it because you can read it and not really be paying attention. But when you do that, every time you do it, a new insight pops into your head. It drops down another level, and it really takes that time. I think that's the best advice I could give you about auditioning, because it's that's how you will find your own response to it, and it won't be just memorizing the lines like I did in that stupid scene in Frasier. It will be, you will have given yourself the best opportunity. A friend of mine once said to me, I look at an audition as this will be my only opportunity to play this part.
Wow.
I'm not going to get the job, I'm not going to not get the job, that's it. This is it. What do I want to say in this room to these people? Because in the end, talk about collaboration. Even that moment is a collaboration. Unrelated to employment or working with these people ever again. Right. It's just like, not being shitty to people on the subway. Give these people the respect of putting everything into it, or don't go in.
What aspect of your experience is more accessible to you now, and it's a surprise to you? Does that make sense, that question? No, I didn't think so. Shall I read it? What aspect of yourself has, to your surprise, become more accessible?
Oh, what aspect of myself has become more accessible in recent years? I would say emotion in this way. It was always accessible to me, but I always worried about it. Oh, I can tell you a great story. This is a really good Uta Hagen story, which speaks directly to this issue of emotional availability. And what happens is, by the way, just as you get older, your emotions just come, you can't stop them. So just know, for all of you actors who are like dying and, I'm supposed to cry in this scene and someone, I don't know what to do. Just age and you'll be fine. So, I'm doing, once again, this play. It's called 6 Dance Lessons in 6 Weeks with Uta Hagen. And there's a scene where she and I are sitting on a sofa in her apartment, and I'm talking about the character of my mother, and it's a speech where I talk about visiting her and she has Alzheimer's and what that was like. Well, I had Alzheimer's in my family.
Yay!
Yay, Alzheimer's.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
No, I know, I'm not kidding you. It wasn't my mom, but I had it, so I know what that was. This was not a case where I needed a substitution.
Right.
And the speech has a certain emotional quality to it. It didn't require that you cry. But from the first rehearsal through every performance, I would always, somewhere near the end of the speech, get to a point where I was overcome by just the emotion, because I know this situation so well. And one night, I'm sitting there with Ms. Hagen, and I'm doing the speech, and I get to the point where usually I start to well up. Nothing happens. It's okay, because sometimes it happens a little later. So I kept going, and I keep talking, and nothing's happening. And I look at her, and I think, okay, I cannot pretend to cry in front of Uta Hagen on a sofa. She's this far away from me. And then, in that moment, I remembered in her book, she talks about emotion and in a scene, and she says, don't ever pin it to a particular moment, to a particular word, just do your work and trust that it's there. So I went on and I finished the speech absolutely dry as a bone. And the next line was, would you like a glass of water? And I finished the scene and I got up and I said, would you like a glass of water? And afterwards we got to intermission. And we walked off stage to go to our dressing rooms and she said, that was interesting. So, there you go.
One more Uta. We're going to open it up to the artists here, but I just wanted to say to you, ask you, did you wait? I just love the Uta Hagen story about when you were in rehearsal, and you were going to pick up the phone or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And he's going to answer something that happens to actors where you're working with an actor and the actor says to you, your fellow actor, are you going to do that like that? You know, about directing each other? Take it away.
Well, now she's ruined it.
Oh, sorry.
No. So this is, we've already had he can't say that way because I won't get my laugh moment. And so then we're in rehearsal, and there's a scene. I play a ballroom dancing instructor, and I'm there to give her dance lessons, and I'm very temperamental and weird. And she finally picks up the phone and this is back when we had phones and dials and buttons.
Right.
And
God.
2001 this was, but that's the way it was. And she calls my boss to have me fired. And per the script, I put my finger on the button to cut off the call. And a couple of times in rehearsal, I did that. And then she went on to dial again, and uncalled for in the script, I did it again. And the second time I did it, she said, no, we're not doing that, that's cheap. And I said, it's not cheap, we're in rehearsal, and I'm trying to stop you from calling my boss. And she slammed the phone down, and she walked over, it was a rehearsal room where everyone was like, she walked over to the tables and sits down and she takes out a cigarette and lights it. And she says to me, I wish you would have some respect for me. And I walked over to her and I put my hands on the table in front of her and I said, as long as I live, I will have nothing but respect for you. Silence. Director says, let's take a 5. And everyone cleared the room, and then she and I proceeded to essentially have it out. And really what it was a bunch of things. She was 83, and she was scared. This was a big deal, her doing this. She was, in a weakened physical state. I mean, this was a big thing that she was doing. She didn't know me. So this was a battle, she felt, for who's going to dominate, who's going to... And I think, in all fairness, I would say that the director was not a strong hand in the process. So that's one thing, by the way, any directors here, that's important, because if the actors don't feel like someone has both of their backs, then they're left to work it out. And we went at it, and she was, I thought, well, this could be the end of this, actually. And I just kept talking, and we ended up, she picked up her stuff, it was the end of we were ending rehearsal, we walked out, she walked through the theater, it was at the Geffen Playhouse in LA, I walked with her, I walked out to her car and stood next to her, and we just talked. And by the time we finally finished the conversation, we had officially fallen in love with each other, which is a love that lasted her entire life. And because we just
Played it out.
turned into a bond of great trust. Those moments on stage with her and the subsequent moments together, those will be among the most precious in my life. Yeah. It's interesting, those iambs that we use, they develop as result of how we use language. And so that's why there are different meters in different cultures, because the French, where the emphasis falls, the French don't tend to talk like that at all. And in fact, I watched Gerard Depardieu Cyrano to get the idea of how the French vote, and it was completely not helpful, because in French it says, it's just so, you can't do that. But right from the early rehearsals, and I would say this, not even early rehearsals, that very first time I went to London to read with Mark, the director, Matthew, said, let's not worry about the verse, let's just say it. And so that's what we did. And it has to do with a little bit of a musical gift, I think, because in anyone who plays music, there's a beat and a meter and a rhythm to the music, but good, well-played music is played within that structure, but it doesn't sound like you're always doing that. And of course, also by osmosis, because Mark is one of the great artists of speaking verse. That if you ever see him, if you get the chance to see him do Shakespeare, or see, by the way, there's some great stuff from Richard II. His Richard II at the Globe, including, if you haven't seen it, The Curtain Call. You must watch The Curtain Call at the Globe. It is one of the most wonderful, moving things you'll ever see. And if you haven't seen it, I won't explain it any more than that. But it's Mark Rylance, Richard II, Globe Theatre, curtaincall.com. So that was that. I think maybe having the innate musical ear to know how to back off, and then being able to play with someone like him who really, as I said, is a master of that.
Do you have a preference towards new work as opposed to established pieces?
So the question is, new plays versus existing plays, do I have a preference? Do you mean as an actor or director, or both?
Both.
Okay. Right now, I've been in a new work phase for a while. I did a revival of the play, but Spamalot was new. I mean, it's, it was a new piece based on other stuff. Curtains, another musical I did, was new. This play I just finished was new. I'm liking that. And the same thing with the musical I directed was also brand new. So I enjoy that, but I don't know if I have a preference. It's just it's a whole different kettle of fish. And this play that we just did at Manhattan Theatre Club, one of the hard things about it is it was the first production ever. And I think a little bit, I mean, I told you the critics really nailed it. I think the playwright in some places got blamed for us not necessarily, all of us in our collaboration, quite finding the right balance. It was a play with a very tricky tone, because it was kind of wacky, funny, but also some very serious stuff. And in some ways we found that, in some ways we didn't. That's the hard part about doing it, a new play, that there is.
Yeah. Yes. Jeff.
You talked a little bit about improvisation in Labette, and I saw it a couple of times, and it showed. It was wonderful, the work that happened between you. Could you talk a little more about the kind of improvisation that you don't find helpful?
So let me just toss one other thing. Along with the improvisation, something that happened with Labette. When we were in rehearsal in London, when we came back from our lunch break, we would play volleyball in the rehearsal room just to sort of get our juices flowing. And we loved it so much that when we went into the theater in London, we continued to do that. And we brought it over to New York. So every night before the show, before half hour, for a half hour before half hour, we played volleyball in the theater, in the seats. We set up a net, and everybody would take a row, and we'd take random teams. So along with, I mean, there's an example of what you could call an improvisation that wasn't named that, but it was all about teamwork, ensemble building, communication, knowing, targeting, all that stuff. But if we had called it that, right? So I think that's how it is. It isn't necessarily any particular kind of improvisation that isn't useful. It's just sometimes when you put the quotation marks around it, if it doesn't seem to come out of the need of the piece or of the scene or of the moment, it can just have a "why are we doing this" feeling. I think that's how I would characterize that. Plus, also, it's scary. And I hadn't done a lot of it. And doing a lot of it in that rehearsal process, I grew to enjoy it and found out, oh, I actually can be okay at this. So that's part of it too, is just fear.
Just old fear.
My general question is, when you felt really part of a collaboration on a new play as an actor, and you can choose if you specifically want to talk about the author's voice and how much of that play was as it is now, because it's such a beautiful one act, and how much you felt you collaborated with that, and how you found the tone for that and found that particular character, which can be played so broadly or realistically.
Yeah, the question was about, in general, the idea of what it felt like to collaborate on a new play, and specifically this play, The Author's Voice. Anyone? Right. Great play. Sadly, that was so long ago that, but I can say this, I don't think I was a very young actor at that time, so I don't imagine there was much input, literally, in terms of lines and stuff like that. Which, by the way, would also apply to the television show. We were not contributing lines because these were great writers. They didn't need our contribution, but it was still a collaboration. And I would say that about Richard Greenberg and Author's Voice, too. And in terms of the tone, I think I got the part. I did have to audition for that. Because I just intuited whatever the right tone was that they were looking for. I can tell you this, that for some reason, this is a good thing for people auditioning. When I read that part to audition for, I pictured him as a gnome. And so when I went in, and ultimately when I did the play, but when I went into the audition and did it, I did it like this.
Oh, wow.
And I moved around like that at the audition. And it was and part of it was I couldn't see him any other way. That was how I pictured him, and so I just did that, and they fell for it. So, yeah.
So I want, if you could, just talk a little bit about your time on Frasier and how you grew with Niles, and becoming that life. And I personally, my parents and I watch that show all the time. It was a real, we love that show. So I'm geeking right now. But the evolution of that character, he was a real person, and his life, and he evolved, and the love and the sadness and all of those super real adventures that Niles went on, and that we joined you while we were watching at home.
Right.
What was that like? How do you plug into that?
This is the best question anyone has asked so far. There is a real parallel. I'll tell you how that happened and why it was able to happen. And there's a real parallel in good television and in good theater. In good theater, the script doesn't change, the part doesn't change, it's the same part. But if it has been done right, as we were talking about earlier, the character, the performance gets to evolve over the length of the run. And you find as an actor, oh, I don't need to tell them so much about who the character is. I can just sort of let some of that stuff go. It tells itself, and what's more about the interaction. The reason I was able to do that as an actor is because the writing on that show was so good that even in the pilot episode, they had written three-dimensional characters. And the earlier scenes, and I will say this also to our credit as actors, we all instinctively knew, Kelsey and me, what was on the page was these are two boys who are in conflict. They're sibling rivalry. That's what it was about. So we as actors knew, okay, so it can't just be that. They've also got to be people who love each other and care about each other. Otherwise, it's that big. So that's the roots of that. It's in the writing. And in the performing, and that's what allowed it to grow. And then over time, like in playing a theater piece for a long time, but also when if you look at any long-running series, if you go back to some of the classics like the Mary Tyler Moore Show, you will find the early episodes. It's funny how sort of not exactly two-dimensional the characters are, but they've got a trait that part of their job, part of the actor's job is to say, this is who I am, this is who I am, this is who I am. But once you have an audience that's on board, and especially if it's a successful show that people are watching, it came to the point where Daphne was the character that I was in love with on the show. Well, it came to the point where she just had to walk into the room, and you knew what I was thinking. So you were just waiting to see how that would manifest itself. But that's the texture that a long-running show can develop.
Yeah. Yes.
You've had an incredible career, and if this was all taken away, God forbid, tomorrow, what would you have taken away from this? What have you learned, not only as an actor and as an artist, but also just as a human being?
The first thing that occurred to me when you said that was you brought back a lot of memories to me. If I were to describe how lucky I am, or people say, well, it's a successful career, I cannot tell you how many times in my career I have been able to say, man, if it ends at this point, it will have been worth it. From the first job, from that, getting on Broadway with those actors and it closed, and I thought, well, if this is it, I'm glad I did it. And then on, Peter Brook in the Soviet Union, and on and on and on and on and on. And so that's been, and if it was all over, boy, it's a big question. I am filled with the people that I've worked with. That's what I would say, the collaboration.
That's a perfect way to end.